The Raft of the Medusa by Théodore Géricault is one of the most famous paintings of the Romantic era. Did you know that the painting is based on a true story? The reason for creating the painting was a maritime disaster that occurred on July 1816 off the coast of Senegal, with the passengers and crew of the frigate Medusa. Medusa was a 40-gun French frigate launched in 1810 and having taken part in the Napoleonic Wars. On June 17, 1816, a French naval expedition consisting of the frigate Medusa and 3 other ships set out for Senegal. On board the frigate were 240 people, the new governor of the colony, officials, their families, and soldiers of the so-called African Battalion. On July the 2nd, Medusa ran aground 50 kilometers from the shore. For the evacuation of the passengers, it was planned to use the frigate's boats, which would have required making 2 trips. It was decided to build a raft in order to transfer the ship's cargo onto it, to lighten the vessel and refloat it. The raft, 20 meters long and 7 meters wide, was built under the supervision of geographer Alexandre Courreard. Meanwhile, the wind began to strengthen, and a crack appeared in the ship's hull. Fearing that the vessel might break apart, the passengers and crew panicked, and the captain decided to abandon it immediately. 17 people stayed on the frigate, and 147 people moved onto the raft. The overloaded raft had little food and no means of steering or navigation. In the pre-storm conditions, the crews of the boats soon realized that towing the heavy raft was nearly impossible. Fearing that the passengers on the raft would panic and try to climb into the boats, those in the boats cut the tow lines and headed for the shore. All those who escaped in the boats, including the captain and the governor, reached the coast separately. The situation on the raft, left to the mercy of fate, turned into a disaster. The survivors divided into opposing groups, officers and passengers on one side, and sailors and soldiers on the other. On the very first night of drifting, 20 people were killed or committed suicide. During the storm, dozens of people died fighting for the safest place in the center by the mast, where the meager supplies of food and water were stored or were washed overboard by the waves. On the 4th day, only 67 people remained alive. Many of them, tormented by hunger, began to eat the corpses of the dead. On the 8th day, the 15 strongest survivors threw the weak and wounded overboard, and then all the weapons, to avoid killing each other. On the 13th day, the remaining survivors spotted the Argus on the horizon, which did not notice the raft and disappeared from view. Fortunately, 2 hours later it returned, accidentally encountering the raft and rescuing the survivors. 15 people survived on the raft, 5 of whom later died. In total, out of 240 people who set sail on the Medusa from France, only 60 survived. The details of the voyage shocked contemporary public opinion. The frigate's captain, Hugues du Roy de Chaumareix, a former émigré, on whom most of the blame for the deaths of the raft's passengers was placed, had been appointed through patronage. Subsequently, he was tried and received a suspended sentence, but the public was not informed about it. The opposition blamed the government for what happened. The Ministry of the Navy, seeking to cover up the scandal, tried to prevent information about the disaster from appearing in the press. In the autumn of 1817, the book The Shipwreck of the Frigate Medusa was published. Eyewitnesses of the event, Alexandre Courreard and the physician Henri Savigny described in it the 13-day ordeal of the raft. The book came into Géricault's hands, who saw in the story what he had been searching for many years, a subject for his grand painting. He rented a huge studio in which, with the help of participants of the ill-fated voyage, a model of the raft was constructed. On it, the artist placed wax figures, refining the composition of the future painting. He went to the Normandy coast to experience a storm and make sketches. He spoke with doctors to imagine how extreme deprivation, hunger, thirst, fear affects the body and mind. Géricault made sketches in hospitals and morgues, drawing the faces of the insane in asylums. He brought decomposing corpses from the morgue, and not only drew them, but sat surrounded by fragments of bodies to imagine what it was like to be there on the raft. Few could endure the atmosphere of his studio even for a few minutes. He worked there from morning until night. In November 1818, Géricault secluded himself in the studio and for 8 months remained alone with the 35-square-meter canvas. Géricault was completely absorbed in his work. Previously, he had led an active social life, but now he did not leave home and even cut his hair, so as not to attempt returning to his former pastime. Only a few friends were allowed into the studio. He began painting early in the morning, as soon as the light permitted, and worked until evening. For the subject, Géricault chose one of the moments of greatest tension in the story, the morning of the raft's final day of drifting, when the few remaining survivors saw the ship Argus on the horizon. There is no main character. Each person has their own emotions, their own fate. Some perish just before being rescued, some gradually lose the will to live, and some find renewed spirit and prepare to fight until the end. The artist created a strikingly powerful image, combining the fallen and the living, hope and despair. The lightening of the sky on the horizon symbolizes the possibility of a favorable outcome. The composition unfolds into depth, drawing the viewer into the space of the painting. The head of a corpse in the corner disappears beneath the frame and seems to enter our real present reality. We see the full range of human experience. A grief-stricken father bends over his deceased son. He tries to hold the body of the dead youth so that it is not swept away by the waves, unwilling to accept death. 4 dead bodies in the foreground form an arc, pulling the raft into the sea's depths toward death. Arms, legs, and heads are turned downward. In this part of the raft reigns the stillness of the dead and the numbness of the living. The father frozen over the body of his deceased son, and the madman sitting beside him with a vacant stare. Several people sitting by the mast have already lost hope of rescue. They have stopped fighting for their lives and resigned themselves to their fate. Their detached appearance starkly contrasts with another group of people who, using their last strength, try to rise and signal to be noticed by a passing ship. The survivors desperately cling to one another, and their bodies form a compositional diagonal directed away from the viewer. This arrangement of the painting is called the diagonal of victory. These people survived and will soon be rescued, although they had to endure the most terrible days imaginable. After Théodore Géricault's death, the raft of the Medusa was put up for auction and purchased by his close friend, the painter Pierre-Joseph de Dreux d'Orsay, for 6,000 francs, while the Louvre was not willing to pay more than 5,000 francs for the canvas. Diderot d'Orsay declined an offer to sell the work for a higher sum in the United States and ultimately transferred it to the Louvre for the same 6,000 francs on the condition that it be placed in the museum's main exhibition. Currently, the Raft of the Medusa is located in room 77 on the first floor of the Denon Gallery in the Louvre, alongside other works of French painting from the Romantic era.